I want to say welcome to I Never Knew TV to the legendary, the great Dr. Ron Daniels, known to most as Dr. D. What's going on?
I think it's fine, man. It's great being here. Finally, after trying to hook it all up and coming to a new space and place.
Malcolm X remains one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, right? Yet he's still widely misunderstood despite countless documentaries, books, and films. Why do you think that is, and what do people often miss about his message and legacy?
Well, let me just say that it's interesting because in my evolution and development, I eventually came up with the NAACP, came up on the more radical side of the NAACP. But it was largely an integrationist movement until I went off to school and Black Power exploded upon the scene. So I didn't know anything about Malcolm X. Didn't know anything about reparations either, for that matter. But I can remember when Malcolm was assassinated at Youngstown State University. In fact, I'd like to go back and find it. It was an article that was written for the Jambo I wrote. I kind of understood that there was something about Malcolm that was important. I couldn't fully grasp it at that stage, but I had some sense of it. But then because of my own evolution, when Black Power came to be, when I went off to Albany, New York. And going to Albany, New York, I went through an entire experience, which was a conversion experience, both in terms of academically running into teachers who began to question, ironically, white Professor John Gunnell, who I was saying, but this Black Power, this stuff is, because I was mimicking what the leadership was saying. Yeah. Even though I had been taught by other professors to think critically, because that's the other thing about my work is teaching, always challenging people to think critically. And it's ironic that it was a white man, Dr. John Gunnell, who asked me as a master's student, he said, "Have you really studied Black Power?" I said, "What?" He said, "Well, have you really studied this?" And I hadn't studied. He challenged me to do so. And so, in so doing, then I went into my master's thesis was entitled Black Power and Ideology on Anvil. So I say all that to say that in so doing, obviously I became more introduced to Malcolm X and what he was about, and grew to be at that stage more identified with Malcolm than Martin, so to speak, because of Black nationalism, the whole question of Black consciousness, the whole question of internationalism. It was Malcolm who was more visibly identified with Black Power. King may have not been opposed to it. Well, he was opposed to Black Power in some ways, but he did have an international perspective. But clearly it was Malcolm who was embracing this. And then, then I had the opportunity to meet and greet and to interface with people like Dr. James Turner, Hakeem Adabuti, and folks like that who worked directly with Malcolm. And in so doing, just, came to appreciate Malcolm in several ways. But in some ways, I've summarized it this way. Malcolm, in some ways, his greatest contribution is what I talked about in terms of evolution and development. He was willing to grow and develop. He had a brilliant mind. Though the Nation of Islam helped shape him in many respects, they were shaping a diamond in the rough. They were shaping a person who already was already a genius. He was a man-child in the promised land in the way that so many of our young people are today. It is demonstrated by the fact that when some of them go to prison, unfortunately, and then start studying, you have some of the most brilliant jailhouse lawyers, all of that. I mean, because the genius is there, if you will. Emotep is in us, if you will, in terms of our DNA. But he was able to evolve. So yes, Islam, but he began to say, well, wait a minute. Some of the ideas need to be refined. When he went to Mecca, he began to see things differently. Even though people said he abandoned nationalism, he never did. He incorporated an understanding that, wait a minute, there's something, it's not just that, it's not this whole whiteness thing, it's not whiteness, it's systemic. There's something systemic about racism. Has nothing to do not just with individuals, but the systemic questions of one. So he was able to evolve. And the most important thing, so and the most, in some ways, the most important part is here was somebody who didn't have a degree, who educated himself, read every book in the prison library. I mean, Malcolm, this just his appetite for information and his ability to self-educate himself and then become one of the baddest debaters, one of the most brilliant, leaders that we've ever produced is something that all young people, women and men, can emulate. So to me, that's one of the most important things about Malcolm, his evolution. He was constantly growing and evolving. And in fact, unfortunately, it was cut down before he could fully evolve and develop. And that's why now if you go to our website, one of the most important projects that I ever was involved with, and I've had some great organizing efforts, was in 1990. We did something called the Year of Malcolm X, because we felt that people were not sufficiently recognizing Malcolm, and that was a whole year of just magnificent organizing that brought out on February 21st, 1990. Over 3,000 people in the Abyssinian Baptist Church. You can still go to C-SPAN and see part of it, of what was happening. You don't see the full story. Unfortunately, the brother who did recorded the whole program, the people lost track of him, so we don't have that. I wish we could find it, but it was one of the most magnificent pieces of work. And Dr. Betty Shabazz had never ever come out on February 21st, ever. Her daughters would come out. Reverend Butts kept things alive every year. I was able to meet with him and all of that. And but on that day, she came out. And then we went on to Omaha, Nebraska. And by Kujichagulia self-determination, we declared May 19th a Black national holiday. So that really set the predicate and set the stage for whatever number of years later, the idea of uplifting his mother, Louise Langdon Little. But I've always been a Malcolm lover. And then when you listen, in fact, when you listen to Malcolm, even though Malcolm Message for the Grassroots is before he evolved in terms of ballots and bullets, you see the change as he's moving forward. But it's just the way in which he could just take complex ideas and reduce them in a way that people could understand them is a level of genius that both King has and Jesse Jackson has, that same genius, being able to do that. So the other day we were just sitting around and I was just quoting, some ideas, that message to the grassroots. Man, that is a bad speech, brother, in terms of the messaging.
Listening to you talk, right? I hear similarities in regards to the upbringing of you and Malcolm. Brilliant parents, mother and father, separated. One has ended but had a separation. Both mothers had to break down. Did you ever kind of have that connection to him due to your childhood when you learned about him?
Now, no. In some ways, it's a little bit different because at least I had the benefit of education, a higher degree of education. But on the other hand, it's illustrative of what Gabral's talked about in terms of committing class suicide. Because what had to happen in my instance was, which was almost not hard to do because I was already committed. That was in my DNA in relationship to both sides. This commitment to black people. The question of how was it going to break out? But I was always committed to using my education as a tool and an instrument to liberate black people, and also to create a sense of critical thinking. I love teaching and using the Socratic method as a way of challenging people to think for themselves and to analyze ideas and whatever. So my decision really is the same decision that a Kwame Ture made, or A.H. Rap Brown made, or a Ella Baker made, or Daisy Bates, or Gloria Richardson, or that was the decision to use my education to liberate my people, because Dr. King did not have to do what he did.
Facts.
I mean, he could have been a comfortable middle class or upper middle class black man and nice church and whatever. But the struggle is largely driven. Even when you go to Selma, you go back and look at the history of Selma. You see the teachers, the educators, the lawyers, the doctors. Even in the face of the terror of apartheid, they decided to fight back, and to dedicate themselves to liberating themselves and liberating the masses of their people. So in that sense, and this is an interesting thing, by the way, I teach people this interesting wrinkle, because Malcolm has this one speech. He talks about the house Negro and the field Negro. And he talks about the field Negro is, he hated the master. He wanted to get out of here, and this, that, and the other. He anywhere is better than this. But that house Negro, he loved the master more than the master loved himself. If the master got sick, he would say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick." But Malcolm really missed the point, because when you go back and look at most of those slave revolts, they were led by house Negroes, right? And in a way,
They were
that's
doing most of the poisoning because they were the closest, right?
I mean, yeah, all of that. I mean, they were sabotage. All kind of stuff was going on. And so what that does is, Baral had it right in the sense that most house Negroes went along to get along and to survive, really. And others were upset about it, but they just would not do anything. But there always a certain segment, Cabral says, who will commit class suicide. And in so doing, they merge the interests of the masses of the people. So Cabral had it right in that regard, because every one of it, you go to Denmark Vesey, you go to Nat Turner, if you go to Frederick Douglass, these are house Negroes who lead. They inspire the masses. See, the most important thing about them is who is it that can motivate and captivate the masses? Who has a message that resonates? People say, "I'm down with Malcolm. I'm down with Frederick," because they ain't down with all of them, because they don't all resonate in a way. So that's the thing that I sort of tried to teach and show people, that Malcolm was right in one way, but in another way, actually, the house Negroes, there was a section of house Negroes who really spearheaded the struggle. And in our communities, therefore, as Dr. James Turner once said, my dear beloved friend, he said, founder of the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell, he said, "Ron, the question is not being of the race, it's being for the race." He said, a lot of people are of the race, meaning we're black.
Facts.
The question is, who will be for the race? Who will fight for, in whatever different ways. Doesn't mean we're all the same. Whatever your profession is, or are you the spook sitting by the door? Or are you the person on the inside passing out information on the out? We're committed, because consciously you understand that a part of your responsibility is to drive things forward. And let me just circle back on that too, because and you'll see this in my book. So when I work, and even now, I go back, and just the other day I took Paul Ann with to Youngstown. I take people back to the neighborhood I was raised in. Why? Because my education is not just my education. It would not have been my education had it not been my father raising me as a single father, a sister more sympathetic, and there was a lot of complicated dynamics going on there, because my father and I clashed a great deal until later on, and then we got much closer together. Probably not unusual in terms of particularly men and fathers, whatever. But those nosy neighbors who wouldn't allow me to do anything, who was watching, but helping to collectively to raise. And then I could go on and on and on about people who just contributed to me. So it's arrogant of me. It's like selfish to me to say that my education is mine. I owe my sisters and brothers. I owe all of them. My education does not belong to me. I have to contribute, because without them, there's no me. So that's the way that's the other driving inspiration to me in terms of just how people have contributed to And I'm always, that's always ever present in my consciousness.
You've spoken about reparations and their role in shaping the future of black people in America, right? Why are reparations so important? And can you explain the difference between race based and lineage based reparations? Which approach should be prioritized?
Again, I talked about the fact that I'm living a blessed life. So I must confess that as a master's degree student, having graduated from Youngstown State University and eventually going on to get a master's degree, I didn't know nothing about reparations. I didn't have a clue what reparations was all about. But because of how I did my master's thesis at the Graduate School of Public Affairs at in Albany, which is now I forget what it's called now. It has a now more fancy name than it is now. That work brought me into contact with many of the frontline organizers with SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but it also brought me into interaction with Queen Mother Audley Moore, who is without question the singly most important figure in the evolution and development of reparations in this era. There are others, a Mario Bedelli and others who are also important, but Queen Mother Moore was a formidable force. I think she only had a fourth grade education, coming out of Louisiana, but she was one hell of a teacher, brilliant as hell, and she was literally just educating people. In fact, I tell people over and over again, she said she was a brain surgeon. Her job was to operate on constipated minds, and mine was one of them. Thank God it was. And so not only was it reparations, she was also fighting for us to understand our identity. And again, her capacity to take complex ideas and reduce them into ways you could understand just shook you up. So, for example, she would always be saying, why are you calling yourself colored? Why are you calling yourself Negro? You're not no Negro. You're black. He said, beyond black, you're beyond black too. You're African. What? See, people don't understand that in the 40s, and even though you go back historically, you see the African Methodist Episcopal Church and African this, that, and so forth. You read history, then it morphed into colored, and then it morphed into Negro, and nobody by the time in my era wanted to be African. I mean, we got raised on Tarzan and Jungle Jim and seeing images of people, cannibals and people boiling people in the pots and all that nonsense. I mean, who the hell wanted to be identified with that? But Queen Mother Moore came and she said, "You are African," and she would say something like, the Italian is the Italian because there's a land called Italy. The Polish is Polish because there's a land called Poland. And then she would go on and on and on. And then she said, where's Negro land? And then where's colored land? Where's black land? And she said, you're African. Why? Because you come from Africa. So she would drive that kind of thought home. And then she was always raised on the questions, well, where's your reparation? What does that mean? And then she taught what reparations are and why we are entitled to them. So if you go back to the Gary National Black Political Convention and you see the film It's Nation Time, you see her standing in the lobby, just passing out flyers. Don't forget your reparations. Don't forget your reparations. She personally took me under her wing and mentored me on this issue of reparations. So that in that regard, then it became a part of the fabric of my life's work, advocating and pushing for reparations. In fact, when Paul Ann and a couple of members of our board came, I took them to Youngstown, then I took them by Kent State University, and I showed them where, during my tenure as a visiting professor there, we dedicated a whole floor in the Department of Pan-African Studies to Queen Mother Moore, and she came there personally to receive that honor. So in that regard, I'm honored to have been associated with John Conyers, who, of course, introduced H.R. 40 at the encouragement of N'Cobra and Amari Obadele and Reparations Ray Jenkins, and that's a whole story in and of itself. He was forced into it positively. I mean, he wasn't reluctant. I mean, he was encouraged, and he introduced H.R. 40 every year since 1989. It may have been, in 1989. Well, John Conyers and I, he was one of my closest friends in the Congress of the United States. One of the other things I've enjoyed is the ability to, as a Pan-Africanist, a revolutionary Pan-Africanist and black nationalist and all of that stuff, I don't really say much about that. I try to live it in terms of the principles and the practices of it. But I've been able to reach across. If you come to the State of the Black World Conference, or even when you see what we put together around what we do in Grenada, you see people across the spectrum. You see people broadly associated with various different. It's not everybody. I mean, we ain't got no Uncle Toms and people like that. But I mean, you see a broad spectrum of the Black freedom struggle. And so John Conyers would count on me every year, 20 years or more, to convene the reparations sessions at the Congressional Black Caucus. In addition to that, I early on became a life member. I was not one of the founders of N'Cobra, but I became a life member of N'Cobra, particularly at the time when I was at the executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. So in that regard, I'm integrally integrated with and identified with and contributing to the forward flow of the reparations movement. And I must say that in this regard, a singular development was at a certain point when it was, because the reparations movement has ebbed and flowed and ebbed and flowed. And I've been through, 40 years of such work and whatnot. In around 2015 or so, 2014, 2015 or so, it was in bad shape. But because of the CARICOM nations, heads of state, deciding to declare their determination to fight for reparations for Native genocide and African enslavement, that bold movement injected new life into the reparations movement in the U.S. It's a longer story. It's an incredible piece of organizing. But the bottom line is, as a result of that, I was able to develop a strategy that led to the founding of the National African American Reparations Commission. And that commission has become an authoritative voice in the entire global reparations movement, pushing it forward. Now, reparations is very simple. It is repair. It is the repair of the damages, the injuries, the crimes committed against African people, both in terms of the physical, mental, and cultural destruction or oppression of a people. That's what reparations is. In the African American context, it is largely for enslavement, one of the greatest holocausts of human history, but it is also for all of the associated crimes that are derivative from enslavement, or what we call the legacies of enslavement, be it exclusion from the Homestead Act, the GI Bill, the FHA, right up to the present, the war on drugs and all of that. That's what reparations is. That is what is based on international law. That is what the body of praxis from N'Cobra to various other organizations has been for 3 decades at least. So that is. It is not defined by some blood quantum. So therefore, we in NARC, we advocate what we call comprehensive reparations. And we've had to adopt that term because there's a recent development of people who may be well-meaning, though there's some evidence that they have been sponsored by right-wing reactionary forces, some of whom are identified with the MAGA movement and with Trump, because they've talked about voter suppression if you don't do reparations and all that. But this group called ADOS, the American Descendants of Slavery, and their spinoffs now called the Freedmen, have advocated that reparations should only be for those Africans in America who can prove by blood quantum, by blood lineage, that were here in this country up to 1865. Because after that, you have the period of Jim Crow apartheid, and then, of course, the most recent period. We in NARC say no to that. We say that reparations are by definition based on lineage. Yes, I mean, is it based on people who, but it's not necessarily a blood quantum thing. It is for enslavement, but those enslaved people may have come from different places and so forth. That there's an intermixture of those who were born here, those who were imported, and whatever in this country, and back and forth. So it's hard to determine all that, and who wants to go through all the sort of calculation of it. It is for that, but it is also by definition for all of the crimes committed that are associated with enslavement. And that is the critical, really, difference between what we advocate and what ADOS and the freedmen are advocating. There's a kind of anti-black immigrant nativism that they push. And some of it feeds off of a issue which is a valid issue but needs to be explored in terms of its real meaning. They say, well, they enslaved us, meaning they talk about particularly Africans. Why should they get our reparations since they enslaved us and they took us and so forth? Well, that's not. Was there some enslavement going on? Was there slavery in Africa? Yes. But the fundamental question, and Walter Rodney and others have demonstrated this, Africans were neither the instigators or the initiators of the transatlantic slave trade, nor were we the primary beneficiaries. And to the degree that people did involve themselves, it was with a different understanding of what slavery was. Only the transatlantic slave trade produced chattel enslavement, reducing human beings to non-human beings and to property. Nowhere else in human history had that ever happened before. And so really Africans didn't know what the hell was going on. I mean, they didn't have a sense of what that system was. Now, does that mean that it is to be totally forgiven? No. But the degree of culpability and the degree of complicity has to be understood in that context, and we still need to heal that wound. And we are working on that and should work on that, because we need to heal all of that so that we come together as a family. And we need to put the focus on the injury and the crime where it properly belongs. And the criminality, in large measure, does not belong, the onus of same does not belong on our African ancestors.
For those unaware, this man is over 80 years old. Is it 82 or 83?
It's 38.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you flip it.
Flip it, right?
It's the Benjamin Button effect.
I've seen this.
No, it's 83 years old.
I've seen this man in action with my own eyes, sharp as a whip, organizing, running around, up early, up late, right? Is it genetics? Is it habit? What are you doing to maintain this level of energy?
Well, part of it may be genetics. My father lived into his 80s and would have lived longer had he not succumbed to alcoholism and loneliness, frankly. My mother died at an earlier age. But to be honest about it, I made a commitment, more than a half a century ago, that I would try to work in a certain way to preserve myself. Because back in the day, we would say, we have an undying love for our people and we wanted to be ready for the revolution. Well, being ready for the revolution means that you have to take care of yourself. And so even though I'm not a vegan and so that narrow, and I'm not saying that negatively in terms of diet, eventually I weaned myself from alcohol. I weaned myself from tobacco, literally. I weaned myself from red meat. So my diet is relatively simple. I do fishing, chicken in various different ways. And it's monotonously good in the morning because it's fruit. Almost every morning it's fruit, a bowl of fruit. Then it gets it deteriorates later on in the day because I have a passion, an addiction to oatmeal raisin cookies and brownies. I have to control that. But in addition to that, I used to, I messed around a little bit with boxing, messed around a little bit with the little basketball, baseball, none of which I was quite good at, and football. But one of the things that doing in football, we used to have to run the steps as being a really strong cardio exercise. And so I've always tried to do exercise. And I was telling somebody the other day, I really think investing in that exercise has been very important. So inside my house, there are 14 steps, and I can't do it now because I had some meniscus surgery. But for many, many years, I mean, people knew in my house in the morning, bright and early, I'm hitting them 14 steps. And at its peak, because I always would be careful not to overdo, if you lay off a while and whatever, at its peak, I could do 100 up, not 100 up and down, 100 up, 100 up. And then, normally when I'm a little off, 80 times, 80 steps. And because I had to find out, my eyes water, so I had to find out what I could do in the wintertime because I don't like cold. I'm definitely, not one of the ice people. I'm a sun person. And so I do the steps. But in addition to that, in my neighborhood, I had a 4 mile walking track. And early on, I would slow jog it or power walk it or just walk it. But in the wintertime, I couldn't do that, so I'd have the steps. So that was an integral part of the training. And then I believe in discipline, as you may have noticed. So my routine is like clockwork. Nowadays, I rise about 4:30 in the morning. I look at way too early in the morning to get a little news. I'll do a little power nap after that. Then I exercise. I put about an hour of exercise in. I do meditation in the morning. Then I have a work period. Then I eat. So I mean, you can almost, if you know my regimen, you know what I'm doing almost every day. And that's because that's a way of disciplining myself to make sure I get that exercise. And every day I'm doing some exercise. So even though I'm not doing the steps now, though I'd like to get back to some level of it, I'm still working on some hips and some issues I got that came up. But I'm still doing exercise every day. So that accounts for it. And the other thing is a strong belief, a strong commitment to the ancestors. I am a very spiritual person in that. Religious, yes, but spiritual in the sense of I'm always reflecting on, the ancestors and where I come from and my commitment to work, and to build in that behalf. So I gotta admit, like the spiritual song says, I ain't no ways tired. I mean, I feel a little bit, but I mean, I actually don't. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like to be 83. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like to me. I mean, it's like I feel good, and I do have energy. And I tease the young people that I use Geritol. Many of them don't really know what Geritol is. It's a remedy that used to be used to get energy and all that. But the real energy comes from that routine and my diet and the exercise.
Can you elaborate more on the relationship or inspiration, strength from the ancestors, and also that purpose and commitment, how that fuels you to go on?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things you'll find about me is I don't care how dire things say, I'm always optimistic. And I'm always optimistic because hey, I take the long view of the Black freedom struggle. It's like the book There Is a River that was written. And I look at what has happened in the past, and I've been blessed by having a mother and a father. And by the way, when you read my book, you'll see me weave these things in. I mean, my father was a great storyteller, only had a fourth grade education, but he told stories of what it meant to be growing up in the South, in Georgia. And among those stories, stories of resistance. He once took us to a place where one of our relatives was actually lynched and showed us the spot. But he also, talked about the NAACP, talked about the value of education. We have in our line, in our family, the Cook family, Samuel DuBose Cook, who graduated at Morehouse College in 1948 with Dr. Martin Luther King. He and Dr. Martin Luther King were very, very close. My father attended that graduation. My recollection is I was out in the car, sitting and so forth. But Dr. Benjamin Mays, he recalls saying that there are going to be great things coming from this class. And he was prophetic because in that class was Dr. Martin Luther King. But there was a close relationship between my cousin, Samuel DuBose Cook, and Dr. Martin Luther King. And my father talked about, a little uncle, how he was, there's a brother who has written the books about, and we will shoot too. Well, we had an uncle who would shoot too. And they talked about the fact that he went into the town after somebody had gotten lynched or whatever and shot the clock down. And people are kind of terrified of him. But eventually he mysteriously disappeared on a fishing trip and so forth. So I got nourished on my father's side hearing all of these stories. And we went south out of Youngstown, Ohio, something like 13, 14 years in a row. And we would go, at one instance, we would go by way of the Mason-Dixon line in Cincinnati, and how the world changed. How, once you cross the Mason-Dixon line, here's a grown man driving his car, having to pull over the road and ask whether you serve colored people here. And then having to be told, boy, go to the back door.
And you saw this as a child?
Oh yeah, no. These are things and that I recount. And again, when my book, there is still on this journey, the vision and mission of Dr. Ron Daniels. I recount those things. And he had his 38 blue steel Smith & Wesson gun up under the seat, because he was also prepared to shoot if necessary.
So this is a straight bloodline thing for you.
Yeah, no, is that and so on that's just on my father's side. And then on my mother's side, because my mother and father, I start off, I'm the son of a coal miner and a coal miner's daughter. My father was a coal miner because eventually he came out of the South and came up to Beckley, West Virginia, or it was Beckley, just another little town over the hill. That was where we were actually born, but we identified with Beckley right up the hill. He came into the coal fields. And even there, the story continues because he was a shop steward in the United Mine Workers, strong union man. And in fact, he was a shop steward under, and I just did a radio show with Bill Fletcher, and I talked about this, under John L. Lewis, one of the most powerful of the labor leaders. And the United Mine Workers are a little bit different. They were a little bit more inclined towards accepting black and white unite and fight. And there was a bloody exchange with the coal miners. It's called Matewan. Bloody. I mean, these companies came down viciously. And they said the river, there was a certain river, I forget the name of the river, that ran red with the blood of the workers. And I can recall my father talking about, he didn't call Matewan. He told me about, he would tell us about this incident that took place. Then later on, when I heard about Matewan, I said that was probably what he was referring to. He probably was an eyewitness to one of the bloodiest massacres of powerful white folks, of workers in the history of the country. So on that side, you've got that. And then on my mother's side, born in the coal fields, constantly hearing the stories about the Great Depression, what it meant to come up in the Great Depression, being deprived, not having, but also coming up under an iron-fisted father, Ed Williams. He was an iron-fisted father. But I think one of the most important things on my mother's side is that she went to 11th grade, very bright, very capable, very on both sides, really smart. But she left and went to Washington, D.C. at about 1941. And she worked at a federal mint, and she told about that experience. Now, later on, I connected that. She would not have been able to work in that federal mint had it not been for A. Philip Randolph calling for the first March on Washington, the original calling March on Washington in 1940, which compelled, and he was willing to be compelled to do it, and his wife played an instrumental role, Eleanor Roosevelt, to pass the First Fair Employment Practices Act that opened up the federal government, even back in the 40s, to black workers. That was a monumental step forward. That helped too, even today. When you look at what's going on today, that was the beginning of the development of a public sector, government-supported middle class. So you might not be able to be in the private end of discrimination, but in the federal government. So my mother was able to go and work in the federal mint, and I was able to connect that history. I didn't know it at the time, but when I circle back and understood it, I connect those dots. So those when we start talking about the ancestors, it might there's just this richness there in terms of what people have gone through, and then my studies of what people have gone through. And I guess my final thing is, for many, many years, and I'm even thinking about it now in this particular moment in history, having worked with Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson and all of that, Selma. I mean, I must have gone to Selma at least 20 consecutive years to go across that bridge. And when you go across that bridge, and you begin to sense, even when you're just in that space, what it meant for people to go across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then you hear the stories of what went into it, and I can feel it when I go across that bridge. And so, to me, that is what has me not only have an undying love for my people. It lets me know that, if, as King said, it may not be in my lifetime. But I know at the end of the day, if we do what we're supposed to do, if I put in the time and energy, that contribution is going to end up in us getting into the promised land someday.
What did running for the presidency in 1992 teach you about yourself and the political system in America?
Well, it running in 1992 didn't really teach me much about myself, except it was kind of a fulfillment, because it's a continuation of the story. Because when I was, in some ways, my history is a tale of two cities, two steel cities, Youngstown, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, my mother and father were not able to stay together. And at 9 years old, they were separated, and my mother took us to August Wilson's Pittsburgh in the Hill District. And it was one of the most, at least the lower Hill District, was one of the most depressing of America's dark ghettos. And I came up in that. But out of that, there's a story to be told, which is, again, in my book. I won't tell you the whole story. You'll be able to read about it. There was also great strengths to be found in institutions, one of which was a place called Hill City that helped to nurture us and bring us along. There were teachers. I mean, I look back and I talk about what a blessed life I've lived, because there were people who intervened at different places to help shape who Dr. Ron Daniels is. Teachers, educators, Sunday school teachers, and all of that. But anyway, to make a long story short, there was something called a cadet corps. And this cadet corps was something that attracted me. And there was a guy named Archie who contributed to that. And this whole idea of drill teams and boogie drill teams, and that gave people a sense of you could, the sisters would kind of like you if you was like throwing down in the Hill District and the boogie drill team. I took that experience once my mother had a nervous breakdown, unfortunately, and my brother and I had to go to Youngstown. She went on to Indianapolis, and I went to Youngstown, and a very difficult experience, though, because my father was quite a person in terms of many respects. He had a rigorous sense of honesty, integrity, and principle about it, but he was also very rigid, you know. And there was he really. My mother had a great belief in me. He thought I was going to be a criminal because I was up in the Hill District. My salvation was something called a cadet corps. I took that experience, transplanted it to Youngstown, and I built this incredible, not only a drill team, but an organization that was dedicated to preventing juvenile delinquency. Incredible. At 14 years old, because of a relationship with supporters, family, sort of mothers and fathers of the cadet corps, I could go to an Army Navy store on my name and get $2,000-$3,000 worth of uniforms at 14 years old. And so I had a cousin who, looking at this, said, that's interesting. He pulled in some of us and began to talk about our possibilities of us becoming a part of the NAACP. And we did. We became part of the NAACP. We listened to speeches about Martin Luther King. We listened to speeches about Malcolm and whatever. But also people who watched this young commander of the Cadet Corps. He said, that young man has got something going. They would even say, he might be president one day, right? And so in that sense, I went on the NAACP and then went on. I mean, that's the beginning of an amazing commitment to civil rights, because I was involved. I was just involved in trying to help people stay out of trouble and whatever. But I went on and became the NAACP was the beginning of it. And then there are stages of it and whatever. So when I ran for president in 1992, which is really a direct result of my friendship with the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, one of the greatest leaders in history of the black world, but also in this country, I ran because I was actually disappointed that we didn't go far enough. And so it was my attempt really to fulfill the vision of the Rainbow Coalition, but it's also, in a way, it was also fulfilling this whole idea that one day I might be president. So my candidacy was never going to make me president, but certainly I had an opportunity to be on the presidential stage and did it in a way that it was really respected. I mean, people respected my campaign, even though it was very symbolic by and large. But out of it, even to this day, there are traces of fulfilling this vision of using the electoral political arena as a way of building a powerful force for transformative change in America. So in a way, I didn't really learn much about myself, actually. There were some lessons to be learned in terms of, and I still carry those lessons with me now, that is that, you never ever think that you have all the answers or that you have stopped learning, that you're constantly learning. Every stage you reach tentative conclusions about where you are, and you keep absorbing information and you keep growing and developing. And I keep that same attitude today. So it was one of the highlights of my life, but immediately, people asked me to do it again. I said, no, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to do it again because I thought it was time for the next generation, even at that stage, to move forward. I wanted Chuck D, the Public Enemy, to run. I've always wanted that younger group of leaders to take the charge and move forward to finish what Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson started but did not complete.
I just have to ask this one. You brought up chattel slavery, right? And its uniqueness in regards to the structure and also the longevity of it, right? Based on your research and information, did they just create chattel slavery, the idea, on their own, or did they adopt it and morph it from another form of slavery? Like, how did it go to a situation where you were enslaved for a certain amount of period of time, you could still marry, you could still work, to a point where the duration of your life, you're enslaved under those conditions?
No, they created it. And the idea is, and first of all, we have to disabuse people of the myth that slavery was based on Europeans' perception of inferiority. It was a labor system. They needed cheap labor. They needed free. Well, they needed. Well, initially, they adopted a different form of slavery. But the point is, they didn't go to Africa because they thought the people were inferior. They didn't really care about that. You know, they had exhausted through brutal genocide. That's why it's always principled to put Native people first. First of all, in the U.S., they had decimated Native nations here, but they also decimated. I don't know. We don't even know what the numbers are in the Caribbean.
Caribs, your Arawaks, Italians.
All of them. I mean, just decimate. I mean, and some of it was through brutality, but some of it was from the diseases. I mean, they just had no adaptation to some of the diseases that just wiped out, millions of people. So initially, the form of slavery that was adopted early on was a form of slavery which allowed you to have a term limit. You worked 7 years, and then you could be free, right? Indentured servitude, you could be free. And that indentured servitude largely meant not only Africans, but also Europeans. See, it's the other thing, just quickly, I have to, history, this history. Oh, what they brought from England, they brought all these criminals to the United States and so forth. Close examination of that history shows something different. It shows the criminalization of the peasants who are being displaced from the feudal manners, driven into the cities. Just like after slavery, you see what I'm saying? And that's why in my classes, that's why that critical thinking, because that's all these criminals. No, they weren't criminal. They were criminalized. And having been criminalized, then they were sent over here. But these were not like murderers and rapists and all that. These were just people who just, and they slapped the same laws on them: vagrancy, loitering, and all that kind of stuff. Those laws, same kind of laws they did at post emancipation on Africans in this country. So they came, brought them here, but after 7 years they could be freed. Because the way Europe was evolving, there was evolving greater evolution towards more democratic systems, more rights of human beings and so forth were developing. Well, how you going? It's kind of hard then to enslave your own people like that. But now with Africans, that was a different story. And not only that, identifiable. See, with white folks, I mean, even if they were indentured, if they faded away, how you going to identify them? So that's why they created. This is unparalleled. I mean, there was slavery in Rome, there was slavery in Egypt, but it was the kind of slavery where you'd be a slave in one generation and you might be king in the next generation. Certainly, that was the case in Africa. In native nations, they absorbed people in wars and whatnot, and we don't need to glorify. And some of it was bloody in some instances and so forth, particularly among native nations. But you could then become absorbed and be a part of that nation. So this form of chattel slavery is what Kenneth Clark called the peculiar institution. It was the creation of Europeans. Only Europeans created this concept, particularly the British American form of chattel slavery, where enslaved people were reduced to property. And that so much so that there was a whole body of law called chattel law that regulated this peculiar form of enslavement. So that never happened ever before in human history, and that certainly did not happen in Africa in terms of creating that kind of diminution of human beings to the level of, to the level of being, like Malcolm said, like a cow, a chicken, or a horse. You were less than a human being. So no, this is, and there's a greater story to be said about Africans in America that's even more brutal in terms of what I call cultural aggression, the decimation, the idea of trying to completely obliterate identity and whatever. You don't see that. In fact, that is one of the great distinctions between what happened in the U.S. and what happened everywhere else. Slavery was brutal everywhere. But if you go to Brazil, if you go to Cuba, if you go to various places, you will find people speaking pure Yoruba, because there was not an effort to de-Africanize the African. Only in the United States was there a constant attempt to de-Africanize the African. And so that's why we have and then there was the effort to keep us from aggregating, because they understood if you had too many Yoruba together, too many Ashanti or Ponta together, they would in fact cohere and rebel, forbid us from speaking our own language or playing drums and all of that. So when you really think about that, imagine the ingenuity of black people who can be barred from playing their musical instruments and yet find a way to take their musical form and push it into European instruments. And out of that comes the blues. Out of that comes jazz and the Negro spirituals, which allows people to be right in master's space and talk about, now we want to sail away to Jesus. And the master's, oh, gee, look how. And they talking about how to get the hell out of here because they came on a ship called Jesus. It was a part of their historical memory. So again, when you start talking about the ancestors, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about the ability of a people coming out of Trinidad to take an oil drum, an oil barrel, and transform it into one of the most beautiful musical instruments humankind has ever. The steel drum. That's who we are. So that's what, to me, when we start talking about the whole question of how you move a people, then you begin to connect to the ancient truths of Kemet, lasting back thousands and thousands of years. Then we start, that's what produces a Malcolm. That's what produces a people in the face of all of this. And that's sort of the centrality of the heart of our ethos and our ethic and our worldview, that what I call is when we're in our right mind. When we are in our right mind, we are inconquerable. Not because we want to conquer the world, but because we have an ethic and a system that at its base is humanistic, as opposed to others who have a conquering, warlike, whatever mentality. So that's, to me, is what also drives me, a sense of, but also it drives me because I want people to understand that if you are in public office, nobody's perfect, but don't get all caught up in the corruption and say, but the white folks do it. And so if the white folks do it, how come they only pick it? I don't care about what white people are doing. I want to know what we are doing. What is our ethic? And it must be rooted in my art, the ancient Kemetic notion of righteous justice and balance. And when we're driven that way, then it's almost irresistible, which is another thing I discovered when the Jesse Jackson campaign. Because when we are on our right mind, other people follow. I was able to witness thousands upon thousands of white people I would have not even believed it, given who were coming out on the farms in Iowa and coming out in places like Oregon and Washington by the thousands, not 15, thousands of people who were coming out under the leadership of Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson, because they were inspired by the best of who we are as African people.
You've done extensive work on voter disenfranchisement, both in America and internationally, right? What does voter disenfranchisement look like in today's America, and how does it continue to harm the black community?
One of the things I think a lot about that these days, It's not universally true, but I often say, because there are some people who just don't see the value of voting. And I was just thinking about this the other day, particularly at the level of what they call, I used to call them, I call them the non-probable voters, the less likely voters. They call them, white consultants have adopted this term, the low-intensity voters, right? And it's understandable because, when people are struggling for an existence, and if they've not been properly educated, they've not been educated really to think critically, because the American educational system is not, it was not set up to have people think critically. In fact, the system was really set up to train people to be workers, to work for master in a different form, in factories and the foundries and the mines and whatever. Then people don't really sort of grasp the power of the vote. One of the things that Reverend Jesse Jackson once said, I was thinking about this recently, because he is such an incredible genius. He and I was talking, I call him an authentic genius. He'd laugh, and because he's an authentic genius. He said that one of the most important acts in terms of American democracy was the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Because what it meant was, in this system, voting matters, even though they tried to block even white people from really fully participating. And so I point out, I said, whenever you find white people trying to stop you from doing something, you better pay attention. Because if they're trying to take something away from you, then maybe that's valuable. So if somebody's trying to stop you from voting or trying to take your voting, block your voting, then why are they doing that? If it's not important, why are you stopping me from voting? Well, voting is one of the levers we have. It's not the only lever we have. We should never, ever say that, because at the end of the day, social movements are the most important. The voting rights of 1965 came from a voteless people who marched in the streets, whose nonviolent protests, particularly Bloody Sunday, shook up the world, tapped the consciousness, not only of Black America, it tapped the consciousness of the world. And it also has to be considered in geopolitical context. You could not be saying to the Soviet Union, you could not be saying to everybody else that you had the best form of government, and yet you had citizens in this country who were yet unfree, and you're competing for the allegiance of Black and brown people globally. That often gets left out too. This is not, that's why, and it's not that complicated. I teach it as a professor, but damn, high school students can understand that. It ain't that complicated. Don't mystify it. It's very simple. People can understand these concepts. So there was a lot invested in terms of the blood on the bridge. And not only the blood on the bridge transferring into the Gary National Black Political Convention in 1972. And the conversion in our own minds from that Negro to Black conversion piece coming out of Black consciousness, because if you don't believe in Black people, you won't vote for Black people. If you believe that the white man's white ice is always colder, you will never buy Black products, or you will never go to a Black, not never, but you should understand that. So there had to be, in this cultural aggression that jammed Black people. That's why I say you can never OD on Blackness with Black people, because we're constantly faced with images of whiteness as being good and beautiful and Black as being negative and bad. And even King recognized this, and it's as bad as a little white lie. It's a good lie. If it's a little white lie, it's okay. Or if sin is terrible, the preacher gets up and gets to preaching, and it's a Black sin. Well, damn, a Black sin is better than, or it's angel's fruitcake and devil's fruitcake. So it is very insidious, the kind of thing that's coming at you all the time. So we can never OD on Black. So it took the shift to Carmichael and Willie Ricks and others saying Black power, Black consciousness, to even persuade Black people to vote again for Black people. I say again because if you understand properly the nature of American history, that period from 1866 to 1876, there were more Black elected officials in the United States Congress and all across the country than ever at any period in history until the present. Which means we have to understand what happened. They took the vote away from us. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were black, really, they were really black amendments. And the 13th Amendment, which established our citizenship, 14th Amendment, equal rights, 15th Amendment, giving us the right to vote. But they took it away. Why did they take it away? Because it was power. We had power. Now, we needed some other power to go with it. We need some economic power. We needed the reparations that we never got, too, but at least that vote. So if they took it away for a reason, because they saw it as being powerful. So it took almost 100 years of organizing and legal work by the NAACP, Legal Defense and Education, by Thurgood Marshall and lawyers like that who were just pounding away and going and pushing, and all of this had to do with the whole question of global dynamics working on our side to get to the blood on the bridge and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And so when we go to Gary, when we went into Gary, less than 1,000 black elected officials across the country. Within a decade, there were more than 10,000. Now, of course, what we want them to do is be of the race and for the race. You see what I'm saying? And that's been a part of the struggle, getting people to be focused, to understand we were not just trying to elect to replace white faces with black faces. It was about empowerment. Not unlike what's happening in Africa, where it's the whole phenomenon of flag independence, just the white colonizers replaced by the black folks, and they become self-aggrandizing. It's a whole kind of general phenomenon. But therefore, the black vote becomes important, and Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson really lays it out again. I ought to go back and listen to his speech, 1984. And it's entitled Rocks Just Laying Around on the Ground. Because what black people have the opportunity to do, and we have in fact, do vote at a higher percentage than some other groups do, particularly Latinos, even to some degree some white folks actually. But we still leave too many votes on the ground. In that scenario of David against Goliath, and he picks up the rock and he hits him, and Jesse says, that rock is your vote, and if you don't use it, it's just a rock just laying around. And so even now in this period, and we have the irony, the righteous irony of the rejected stones. Like Jesse Jackson once said, those who pick cotton will one day pick presidents. Well, the same thing now applies. We're in the most dangerous period in the history of these United States of America, where the fundamental tenets of democracy and the Constitution are being challenged by a madman who occupies the White House. And the irony is that if black folks mobilize and organize in large numbers, because the American system, unfortunately, unlike other systems, people are discouraged. Even there are large numbers, there are millions of people who don't vote in this country. So those who vote will win. So the margins, if you understand what Trump did, he really inspired people who had grievances, some who were racist and all that. They were not voters. Yeah, right. I say the biggest political party in America is not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's non-voters. That's hyperbole, but it helps to make the point. If you're in Europe, if you're in Germany, if you're in France, you're talking 80% of the registered voters turn out, 85%. In the U.S., you get 55 or 60%. It's like record turnout. But that means millions of people were left on the sidelines. And some of them are black folks. So follow me when I say that if we mobilize the unmobilized, non-registered, low-intensity voters, which is the conversation I have with my barber, when they say, oh man, ain't no make no difference, man. Ain't no difference between them. They're all the same. We have to get people, we have one of our biggest challenges right now is what I call political literacy and civic engagement. That people have to understand this system. Koringa puts it best. We are realistic, but as for reality, we have come to change it, which means is I'm not enamored with the system as it is, but I must understand and use the system as it is, even as I am moving to transform it into a far more inclusive, humanistic system that has both economic democracy, which is important. Some would say democratic socialism. You know, Mandami's talking, hey, people are all scared. Oh, you know, yeah, well, yeah, where there's a public space that protects human beings and so forth, and where there's political democracy, and for real. So in many European countries, you register once. You ain't got to go back and register all over again if you didn't vote. I mean, and now with technology, you should be able to register one time, period. Should have election holidays, same day on site. Right. The other day, the orange man said something about we're moving the some kind of center from Colorado to Alabama because he's upset because they have mail-in ballots, and mail-in ballots he thinks are fraud. Mail-in ballots makes it easy to vote. So the ballot becomes fundamentally important. Right now, in the period that we are right now, the two most important weapons we have are ballots and boycotts. Ballots and boycotts. In this situation, this unprecedented situation, ballots that can be used to recapture at least one branch of government, if not two, in 2026. But in the interim, we have the power. And Dr. Martin Luther King, that's why it's not just Malcolm, it's also Martin. This is why they both were assassinated. They were on this marvelous collision course with each other, where their differing but complementary ideologies were being merged. So King and the mountaintop speech, people don't look at more and more people are paying attention to it now, but this extraordinary orator on the night before he dies takes a moment to say, now I just want to talk to my people a minute. He basically said, you must learn to use what you have in your hands. He was not the architect of, but he was the inspirational leader of one of the most successful and consequential boycotts in the history of the world, the Montgomery bus boycott. Why would we take away the use of our collective power? And when you look at what they did, the Montgomery bus boycott, where people just came together as people, created their own little taxi system, own ultimate bus system, all this stuff. Black people came together to do the Montgomery bus boycott. So what King is saying the night before he passes away, he says, you don't have to buy Seal Test milk. You don't have to buy Wonder Bread. You ain't got to buy Coca-Cola. If they're not hiring you, you don't necessarily have to support them. If they're not supporting you, don't support them. He said something else. We must learn how to redistribute the pain. He says that to his people before he goes on to talk about the garbage workers, which became sanitation workers. And then people have to remember at the end of his life, he was talking about the Poor People's Campaign. People just don't even grasp it today. He was talking about an economic bill of rights, where every human being in this society would have guaranteed annual income, education, health care, and education, all of those things, right? That was the revolutionary king, the king who said true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to understand that the system which produces beggars needs restructuring, and says to his wife, I'm increasingly disappointed in capitalism. I am embracing socialistic ideas. So when people want to talk about Mandami, go read King. Over and over again, he talks about his sense that socialism, democratic socialism, is the way forward in terms of moving forward. So all of that is to say, ballots and boycotts, because that's why we got to take our hats off to Reverend Jamal Bryant, because it's also art and science. So you can't boycott everything at the same time. You have to focus. You have to understand the art and science of it. And Reverend Jamal Bryant is somebody who's grabbed that. He has target, and it shows what you can do. Now, why not have all of black leadership rally around that and use that as a tool? Because if you jam the commanding heights of capital and finance, and really it's a consumer-based economy, And you don't have to just, I mean, I understand margins. You ain't got to stop all of it. We should try to, but it's about margins. You start messing with them. What happened with Target? Their margin of profit is dropping. They're not losing all of it, but their stockholders, they're going, hey, what the hell's going on? I mean, damn, because they're in it because they want to make money. We understand that. Then all of a sudden, you were for DEI. Now you're against DEI. Maybe now you want to consider it. Because we have that weapon in our hand. But it also is predicated on what? You can't OD on blackness. You have to have a sense of being of the race and for the race. And if you're of the race and for the race, you will use your ballot. I hate to use the term weapon, but I'll use it in this kind as a weapon in the black freedom struggle. And you will use boycotts as a weapon in the black freedom struggle in order to create that my art-oriented society.
You've emphasized that collaboration is key for the future of the black communities, right? How can people start collaborating effectively, and what does it take to nurture relationships so everyone benefits long term?
Well, that's not very hard, really, but it takes the art and science that some people are not willing to practice. I mean, I try to practice it, and I try to mirror it. First of all, it's very simple. It's obvious if you're looking at a community. It's like sort of the need for specialization and division of labor. If we have 5 organizations that are good at voter registration, why do we need 100? Why don't we just all support the groups that's doing voter registration, right? And you can go in different areas. So we need specialization and division of labor. At the end of my book, I have a little chart that I sort of lay out different areas of work that could be done. But it really comes down to a willingness to share, a willingness to focus on not me, myself, and I, but we, us, and our, a willingness to focus on not a leader, but leadership, meaning plural, and the willingness to share. And by that I mean when I share.
Before you continue, when did you get to that point in that understanding?
It's almost I almost can't remember when it was. I mean, it's almost like in my DNA. I just, it's certain things became self-evident to me as I was evolving and working as a leader. The whole concept of operational unity, which was put forth by people like Karenga and Kwame Ture. The question is, how do you operationalize it? Barack and all of them talk about it, but you can't. By the way, one of the things you can't do if you're going to be at this, you have to have people of good faith and trusted facilitators. That's a key piece. If you're going to be a good faith and trusted facilitator, it means that you need to avoid getting involved in internecine conflicts. You need to avoid situations where you are attacking other leaders publicly. In fact, Malcolm said what? He said, hey, go into the closet, and go in back, air your dirty linen publicly. And one of the reasons you don't do that for 2 reasons, by the way. If you air your dirty linen publicly, it shows the enemy that you have divisions. But in actuality, the average person who's looking at what's going on, they don't want to. They are mystified. Why are they fighting? Why are they fighting with each other? The average ordinary person, Pookie and Ray Way and others and beyond that are saying, well, why are these Negroes fighting with each other? What is that all about? You don't want that. You want to show a united front as best you can. So what that really means in some ways is, struggle behind closed doors. And you do operationalize principles that say that, and there's some limits, but then limits, there's some issues that we may not agree on, but let's find out what we agree on and then let's work on that. So I found myself over the years, there were some people who, in some instances, I can recall people who attacked me at a certain point, were fearful of my leadership or whatever, so forth and so on, and I was in Youngstown. But when it came down to certain issues, I say, well, I can set that aside. Let's work together on this. Or we may have differences in between they were integrationists, I was dealing with black power and whatever, and some of that was some of the sources of the tension because they were trying to, salvage a certain way of doing things. I'm looking at it a different way. But respecting each other's differences and then saying, all right, what can we still do to advance the interests of the black community? Because between the integrationists, if you look at all the different tendencies, in some ways the objectives are still the same. What is the pathway to freedom? Somewhat ill-defined in some ways, but how do we advance our interests? If you do that, that's also helpful. The other thing is being able to recognize that it's important to give recognition to people. Not to be like, turn everything into a Ron Daniels thing.
And I just want to commend you because I witnessed you. You do a very good job of that.
Well, it's conscious, but it's also part. It's don't make it a Ron Daniels thing. In fact, in some projects, we don't necessarily even make it an IBW thing. It may be an IBW thing. But one of the things about organizing is that people will see you in action. And I witnessed this for something called our Justice Collaboratives. We didn't say IBW Justice Collaboratives. We just said Pittsburgh Collaborative or Baltimore Collaborative. After a while, people said, how come y'all ain't come? They came to us beginning to say, well, how come you're not saying IBW? And had we said IBW first, then what are they doing? What's this up? What's that might have been a problem. So it's an art and science and giving recognition and sharing leadership. Everybody, people, it is good to recognize people. But if you represent Clinton, an organization, and you contributed something. I once had this conversation at the Center for Constitutional Rights, even when we were doing pictures. In fact, even now that we're going through something with a group of people, and I'm trying to get them to understand who you select to do it has to do with your alliances, your partnerships, and making sure you include people in the deal. We have these town hall meetings. People say, how come you got 12 people on the stage? Well, we have 12 people on the stage. It makes it difficult to manage the conversation. But a part of it is what? Making sure that all the different segments are represented. And then when you do it in such a way that those segments are honored and recognized. So Clinton, if you got a constituency and you contributed to what we are doing, we're putting our photos together. There might be somebody else who did something. I got to make a choice between you and that person. I want to make sure you're there. I'm putting your photo there not only because it will also make you feel good, but your constituency sees that we were respecting them by including them. It's really simple. You need to respect people. It's not all about you. It's about all of us working together. And, I like to, when I'm speaking too, I try also, I can't, sometimes you can't always be on the stage, but you can acknowledge people who ain't on the stage. Just drop names. Say, yeah, I'm brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so, we see you and so, and that's another way of doing things. Even in my own case, in some instances, and I get disrespected a lot. We're going to talk about that later. I didn't get excluded, and people I have to suffer through some of that. But in some instances, it's not whether you want to speak. It is just get acknowledged. Just somebody said, hey, Dr. Ron Daniels is out there and whatever, so forth and so on. That not only helps me, but it also my constituency. Oh, yeah, Dr. Daniels, is being recognized and whatever. And the other side is, like I said, being trusted. And some of that, becomes how you conduct yourself. You don't betray people. You don't tell. When people say to you, if you say to me, Clinton, Dr. Daniels, I'm just telling you this in confidence, you can take it to the bank. I ain't telling nobody. Because you told me not to tell nobody. It ain't coming from me because you can trust me, right? And so this idea, but the need to collaborate is crucially important because we don't all need to be doing the same thing. And so I am so, and let me just, it was when I was coming off the Jackson campaign and people were saying, what's the next step? What would she do next, and so forth. And I told people, and this not an ingenious idea, but in some ways, yeah, it is powerful. I said I would be traveling around the country. Brother Ron, man, after the Jackson campaign, seeing what the next, man, these white folks, man, it's terrible, man. I ain't never seen no white people. I mean, it's this thing. And there ain't no movement, man. Ain't nobody doing nothing. Well, first of all, here you are. You fighting for African-centered education. You fighting against police brutality. You fighting for housing. You're doing something. So you are the movement. But here's the problem. In the same city, 7 of you y'all ain't talking to each other. I made that observation. Not only are the 7 of you in this room not talking to each other, you're not talking to the rest of the people around the country who are doing the same thing. If you collaborate, power.
I know you witnessed this and you experienced this, right? There's an immaturity there and an ego there that causes all this behavior, right? So do you think...
Well, let me just introduce another factor that's real that you have to deal with. It's also, with scarcity of resources, a competition for resources. So you have to assure people that you're not trying to take their money. I mean, that's real in these different cities. That's why sometimes the outside group can be more effective than the inside group. And you have to, when you come in, you have to let them know that you ain't doing this because you're trying to take away their grant. Because that grant money is out there floating and everybody is competing for grants. Which, by the way, is another piece that I work on. It's trying to get people to understand how you can attack a problem with different people taking different pieces of it. So that when you go to the funder, each of you goes not asking for the same thing, but complementary components of the same thing, right? Give you a quick example. There was something called a church burning crisis that broke out when I was at the Center for Constitutional Rights. This has been years ago. And that was across the country. White folks was attacking and burning down black churches. Also, unfortunately, found out there were some Negroes burning their own churches down too. But overwhelmingly, it was white supremacists attacking these churches. I'm at the Center for Constitutional Rights. There's something called the Center for Democratic Renewal in Atlanta, the C.T. Vivian's organization. And then there's the National Council of Churches, all working on this issue. But here was the beauty of it. We all found a way to get funded because the Center for Democratic Renewal's role was to do the research. The National Council of Churches' role was to do the rebuilding. The Center for Constitutional's job was to do the legal defense. Everybody can get complementary funding. So that's something you have to figure out. That's another thing that you can figure out in terms of the complementary way of helping to address the issue of the need for resources. A very, very important component of the, of the work. So just to sort of cap this whole piece out, that issue of collaboration is manifest in every piece that we do. There are only a certain, even if there's an area that we look at you only go into an area that's not already being covered. Like Haiti as an example. Nobody was really doing the work around Haiti. So therefore, we're kind of but even then, we try to do it in a collaborative way. But almost every piece of work that we do, so if it's around the Pan-African Unity Dialogue, which you may have experienced, it's pulling all the different tendencies together. If we do gentrification, the idea is to get people who have not been doing the work together to come together and work together, create a network among them, and then create a resource center or function as a resource center to provide technical assistance and whatever. And that becomes our unique role. We don't necessarily do the specific work. And every one of our initiatives, you'll see that same pattern. So it's creating this collaborative structure of people who are working together. And I'm hoping really to that is, in a way, my unique, in a way it is a unique contribution. We have an ecosystem of these. That's why I sent you that chart. we have an ecosystem of these initiatives, and it represents really my legacy in terms of how I see IBW functioning as an engine that's creating these collaborative structures. And we're just good faith facilitators in the middle, sort of, helping to move it forward with a couple of specific pieces that maybe are particular ones that we're driving.
What advice would you give about the importance of being committed to a purpose? You spent 6 decades educating, inspiring, and fighting against injustice. How can a young brother stay consistent, complete a task, and stay committed even when it's difficult?
Well, it's really difficult today. And to some extent, it becomes important for me to interface more and interact more. That's why with younger people, just get a sense of what they're up against, because they're up against things that I was not up against. And social media is one of them. I mean, we didn't have this social media phenomenon of the interaction and the bullying and antagonism and the fights that go on the internet. And we have a community where it's a little bit different, because even in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, or even in Youngstown, Ohio, there were no motherless children or fatherless children, in the sense that there was collective parentage. And so we couldn't, we had in Hill District, Lord have mercy, it was rough, man. It was rough. People on that street, on 6th Street, where I lived, they may not have even liked each other. The one thing they had in common, you didn't mess with the children. And the other thing is they protected each other from outside forces too. The rent collector coming, I don't know that kind of thing. That is broken down, man.
I'm sorry to cut you, because I had a reasoning with a Brazier recently. When did this rise of promotion of this nuclear family isolated from community start? And when did communities stop protecting children?
Well, I think that we have to look at it in terms of a series of forces. And I'll give you I'm going to say one of the forces was two major forces: deindustrialization. 3 forces: deindustrialization, disinvestment, and mass incarceration. These are 3 factors. So if I go back to the Hill District of Pittsburgh, it is not that we didn't have at-risk, quote unquote, at-risk young people, particularly at-risk men. It's not that we didn't have gangs, because we did. But those gangs largely, and I would remember some battles that we went through: sticks and stones, bricks, a switchblade, worst weapon, a zip gun. That's one little thing. It might not even fire, and if it hits you, it might not even. It's like a .22 zip gun. And people fought. Now, that's problematic in that we should not have been fighting each other, but this again has to do with that. It has to do with that cultural aggression, right? I mean, that's still, black folks should not be even at that stage. But you didn't hear about no 55 shootings and 7 people got killed. I mean, I can't remember hearing anybody in the Hill District got killed. In that sense, what I do remember, people getting killed about was shooting craps. That's why I never wanted to shoot craps. People down and people get to fighting over shooting craps. And somebody gets them, cut somebody, and that kind of stuff. Stuff was going down, but not among young people like that. And so, even if you did not if you were a man, even if you didn't complete a high school education, Pittsburgh was the #1 steel producing city in the world.
Still get a livable wage?
Oh, yeah. So therefore, you could go and become, quote, a mill hand. A mill hand kind of had a kind of like, you a mill hand, but mill hand was making a damn good wage, comparatively speaking. Now, I have to say that comparatively because you also have to understand that there was segregation up south, de facto segregation. So black folks even then could not rise above a certain level. If you had 10 levels of work and wages, you could only go about halfway. White folks could do all of it. You weren't confined to the labor gang, the dirtiest work and whatever, but you still made a damn good wage. You took that damn good wage and you raised your family and you put that nonsense, you start laughing about, man, you remember when we used to do that old stuff? But what happened when you had deindustrialization? All of a sudden, where's the jobs? And in fact, there was a conscious effort, going back to the Moynihan report, Patrick Moynihan. It was called benign neglect. There was a whole notion of not investing, not reinvesting. And not reinvesting was, I think King said, poverty is a predicate for criminality and crime. Now, that criminality and crime might be petty crime and so forth. I mean, Malcolm was involved in some stuff, but it's petty stuff, right? Petty stuff, right? But then you had the introduction of drugs. The introduction of drugs, the conscious introduction of drugs into, and there's a film that everybody should see. It's called Bastards of the Party. It was an HBO special. I was shocked to see the HBO would show this. It showed how these street gangs that were street organizations, Crips, Bloods, and all of them, they were street organizations. Now they would contest and, whatever with each other and so forth. But they did not have firepower. Once drugs got to be a part of it, the ability to sell narcotics and drugs, they can now buy high-powered weaponry. And so therefore, that what used to be the fist fight, that used to be the straight out little throw down on the street corner, now became you dying in the streets. And when you start dying in the streets, then the revenge and the retaliation, the revenge and the total deterioration. And of course, no jobs. I mean, no jobs. Even today, I mean, it's very clear. They're showing right now in Baltimore where they have hired. In fact, back in the days of the 60s and the 70s, when people were fearful of rebellions, you can go back and read the headlines. Elected officials fear a red hot summer. By red hot summer, they meant protests and maybe riots, or they call them rebellions. Government creates 500,000 public service jobs. They just hired people. And when they hired them, they began to orient them to what? Work, occupational training and whatever. And they had enough to buy the school clothes, buy the books, whatever they needed and so forth. Right now in Baltimore, they're showing that same approach, crime has plummeted. Because it's jobs for guns. Even today, if you give people jobs, they'll lay down the guns, by and large. Now, some won't because some people become habitual. They become pathological. Those are the ones you need to focus on and isolate. But by and large, people are just, no. Do you think people really want to die? They can talk that smack. They really don't want to die. It becomes like fatalistic. I am going to die, so hell with it. I mean, then that leads into a whole thing. But deep down inside, they don't want to. So it is though, so therefore what you then had to have was mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. Which Saul Alexander's book is is brilliant in that regard. Because you have a closed system where the war on drugs was a war on us, and then sent people into the joint in mass numbers, and in the joint creating another kind of culture, which people come out and begin to emulate. For black folks the world over, there's something about rhythm and something about our being colorful, right? And a part of that is in the way we dress. And the way we dress is colorful, maybe bizarre, in that zoot suits and colorful and big hats and so forth, but never raggedy. Never raggedy. Never with your jeans hanging down on your butt. Never ever that raggedy equals beautiful. That's not black people. It was learned in the joint. because you got them, and then it's like imitating the chain gang, and that whole thing. You walking with your butt, and that came out. That became a part of the culture. I'm not condemning it. I'm not saying that those brothers, particularly brothers, are to be condemned for that. But all of that became a fabric, mass incarceration, ripping up families and whatnot. And then the ethos and the ethic. And even now you see parts of it. Then you end up with younger and younger people. You end up with children raising children. People in their 20s, I mean, having babies and all of this. And again, I'm not one of these people talking about the family. We have to support the family in whatever configuration it is. Single mothers raising, single fathers raising, but we have to have a system of parentage in which somehow collectively we are raising the children. So all of those things have contributed to a very, very serious crisis that we have. And that crisis is this internal fratricide and internal murders that really gnaws at the black community. It's very painful. I mean, having the ability of just the random, there was no such thing as drive-by shootings in the Hill District. I mean, nobody had that kind of thing going down when you didn't know predictably that some young people were going to come through and just like start killing people. I mean, that's demoralized. That is traumatizing. So what's going to have to happen is a lot of healing. Psychocultural healing has to take place. And there's got to be a lot of reinvestment in the black community. And again, a part of the healing is culture and history. I mean, people have got, and that's why there's a group called Man Up Incorporated in East New York. And the cure violence model, or the violence interrupter model, has spread all over the country, and it's reasonably effective. But I contend that the most effective approach is you also have to deal with the wound internally. And they have to deal, and a part of that is the healing is culture, having a sense of who you are as a black man and a black woman. Because also there's more and more incarceration of black women now as well. And there's all kind of implications that have. So we have a serious internal challenge that we need to face. That's one of the others, gentrification, which is a different kind of scenario, but it's all, even that is ripping up communities, if you understand what I'm saying. A part of the problem in Chicago is gentrification. I mean, it's gone through and it's separated neighborhoods. It's thrown people who were in different sides of town into the same neighborhoods, who were maybe were contesting and having beefs with each other and all that. I mean, that's something that's not even talked about. But that can be dealt with through mediation. That's what defund the police really meant. Got to get rid of that term, because even black people know, so you need police officers to do something. But the need for social workers and psychologists and the whole breaking up of the whole infrastructure of mental health in the community, all of that needs to be addressed. It's a big job. And that's why we have to be on the offensive, demanding massive investment in black communities all across this country. Massive investment in communities across this country as a way of dealing and coping with this problem. But we have to address it. We have to deal with it much more intentionally than we are doing at this point in time. But like I talk about in that list of issues of having black family reunions, but now we have to contend with the fact that some person will come up and get the shooting and cutting and whatever. We got to figure out how to be able to protect ourselves, which means deploying women and men who are violence interrupters, who are capable of spotting and knowing who may be beefing with whom and whatever, and cooling that out and working seriously on those issues. And I don't think we're focusing on it enough in terms of healing that wound, because it is ripping at the fabric of the black community, particularly in urban inner city areas. If you're in the exurbs, you kind of escape maybe, but in some ways, that which is here will eventually bleed out, and it'll infect everybody.
So for those unaware, you had a monumental experience recently in Grenada with the work you've been doing. Can you please let the people know what went down?
Well, I think we need to, we could do a whole segment on that, but suffice it to say that I'm incredibly proud of the fact that under the right circumstances, we could go into Grenada and help to inspire a nation to recognize one of its legitimate heroines in Louise Langdon Little, who was not just the mother of Malcolm X, which is important in its own right, but that's just a biological fact. But beyond that, someone who was a social activist in her own right, someone who was instrumental in the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, along with her husband, and someone who had an amazing impact. We're learning more and more and more on her direct impact, not just the Nation of Islam, how she directly impacted her son, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, our black shining prince, Omawali. So to be able to go to the actual place that was just a field, just a crumbling building on one side of the road and just a grown-up patch somewhere else, just sitting there, unrecognized, unheralded, and the Institute of the Black World 21st Century to assemble a team of people with Paul Ann Patterson being at the center of it as a Grenadian sister and woman, a warrior woman, and a great team, and to be able to raise the consciousness and to earn the trust of the family, being respectful, as we talked about this whole issue of collaboration and whatever, to uplift the family, understand, work collaboratively with institutions of government and the civil society, and to watch that being transformed to what we now see there now. And that's only the first stage of something that will become a cultural, historical site that people from all over the world are going to visit. And it is going to contribute to the economic revitalization of that whole area. That is one of the great sort of visions and triumphs of my life work.
What's the most shocking thing you learned about Malcolm X's mother, like gathering this history?
Well, I think I've said that I knew a little bit, but the more we learn, the more we find out that she was formidable, and that indeed, the high probability that she was interned in a hospital as punishment. First her husband it seems was assassinated, was killed, and then she was hospitalized under false pretenses as a way of shutting her up. But that she was again not just his mother, which is worthy of celebration, but she was a formidable human being. And people like Dr. Julianne Malvo and others are now writing more and more about her. And we're not responsible for all of that, but we're responsible for really, really helping to. And by the time we get finished, stage by stage, 5 years from now, that site will be entirely different. But to have navigated that respectfully, working with the family and with local institutions and local leaders, that's how we roll with IBW, and that's what I'm really, really proud of.